Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders for coders about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer and aspiring software architect.
And I'm Beej, the journeyman developer sharing my journey in development. Whether you're a young genius, a forever dreamer, or a wise sage, you'll meet many different types of developers. The way they express their knowledge and skills can be boiled down to several personality archetypes. In this third episode on types of developers you'll meet, we're talking about different ways developers express their knowledge or lack thereof. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Dates and times. More specifically, anytime you've got a payment processor, things get interesting. Right? Because if you're recording a date of, when a transaction happened, there's the user's time, which is what they're going to refer to when they're like, hey, I did it at this point in time. There is the server time, which is what you're probably going to refer to for logging. There is the payment processor time, which is what is the transaction record time. And potentially your server's in a different time zone than your office is. So when your support people are looking at stuff and trying to correlate, gets hairy. And so I'm dealing with some of that kind of stuff at work. We had a pretty good slugging match with it last year. And because I survived that without a sufficient level of complaining, I've been gifted with this ticket this year. And so, yeah, it's just way too much stuff to think about. And I don't even know where this time came from. Like you get a timestamp and you're like, what is this from? Like, I don't even know if I'm correct, without a whole lot of work. And so it's been a lot. I guess that's probably about it. Oh, and I'm having to do some of that crap in JavaScript too, which is not helpful either. Because I'm having to use moment.
I remember dates, times in JavaScript.
And I've been dealing with that. And then I've been working on a Gatsby blog and I wrote some helper scripts. And so I've also been dealing with dates and times in there too. And I'm like, I can't even get away. I was like, this is my goof around, not super serious yet project. And yeah, still can't get away from it.
Yeah.
So how about you?
Oh man, I think I'm a bit overworked at the moment. I'm feeling stretched thin. And honestly, I'm struggling not to snap at coworkers. Though when you tell me something isn't working and I ask, hey, what'd you pass into the endpoint? Don't copy the entire controller code into Slack. Like that literally happened to me yesterday. And I'm like, no. I didn't ask what, like I can look at the code. I've got it sitting in front of me. I'm saying, what did you pass into that endpoint?
Yeah. It's like, well, why is it getting a, 404 on this route? Here's what and I'm not going to tell you what I passed in for the route parameters or anything.
Yeah. I'm like, well, can we just get on a WebEx call? And I'm like, no, just answer the question. Like, that's a waste of time. I just need to know, what did you pass in so I can start like looking up why it's not working and I can replicate the issue. Finally, I got the stuff I needed, but it was a back and forth about that. And I'm like, I don't want to spend 3 hours for you to answer one question because that's what's going to happen. So I don't know. It's been like that for a while. And, I'm on one project and we're planning another project, which that's all right. I don't mind that. But then there's one maintenance thing that we put on another developer, but because I wrote the code a couple of years ago, he's calling me to ask questions and stuff. And I don't mind answering his questions because he can be pretty like, when I tell him, hey, I don't have a lot of time to talk, he'll just get straight to it. If I don't tell him that though, it's going to be a 45-minute conversation because he's a musician and we talk a lot to each other. So, but that's cool. It's fun when I want to have that conversation. Also, I don't have an oven right now. I pulled it out over the weekend to deal with a mouse problem and just haven't reinstalled it because I'm waiting to see if I get any more mice from that area. So I'll know if there's like another hole that I haven't filled in. I mean, this mouse problem is very frustrating. In happier news, Amanda and I took the bike out this past weekend. It's always a lot of fun. We hung out with some of her friends. I think you met them at my birthday party, Kimmy and Chris. That was a lot of fun. Honestly, I enjoyed talking with Chris. I haven't had anyone to talk with about like the physics of time and just really like strange, nerdy stuff on that end. Like you and I talk about some really nerdy stuff, but not that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's different nerdy stuff.
Yeah, so it was really cool, and I really enjoyed it. With that, let's go ahead and get on into book club. The 11th quality of a team player is mission conscious. A quote from the book: "The big picture is coming in loud and clear." Maxwell starts out this chapter telling the story of Mary Hayes, or Molly Pitcher, as she's known, in the Battle of Monmouth during the Revolutionary War. She had accompanied her husband, a heavy artilleryman, to help care for soldiers, bring them water during battle, that sort of stuff. But as the battle wore on, she watched her husband die, and seeing no one to take his place, she stepped up and continued his work on the cannon, ultimately helping the Americans win that battle. Maxwell then gives 4 qualities to look for in a team member who is mission conscious. First, they know where the team is going. Next, they allow leadership to lead the team. They don't try to take it over. Then they place the team's accomplishments above their own individual accomplishments. And finally, they do what it takes to win or achieve the mission. And he closes the chapter with 3 ways to improve your mission consciousness. Make sure the team is focused on the mission, find ways to remind the team of the mission, and do your best as a team member. I'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Well, normally we would say who's talking to us, but right now the whole comment and water bottle thing is on hold. We're still trying to get our supplies sorted back out. And the other thing is we've kind of got to get some better ways of getting comments in. But if you email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com, that's probably the best way to get a hold of us, or jump in on the Slack at slack.completedevelopernetwork.com and send us a comment, because once this stuff is over and the world is kind of normal-ish, as normal as it's going to get, again, we'll be back to doing that. And yeah,
your advertisement could be here. If you like the show and would like to advertise on here, send us an email to adverts@completedeveloperpodcast.com. We have short-term, long-term, and other sponsorship opportunities, such as paying for water bottles or whatever it is we send out. Reach out to us and let us help you reach the people who you are serving.
An archetype is a recurring symbol or motif in literature, art, or mythology. It is a very typical example of a certain person or thing. It can be called a universal symbol. Personality archetypes are based on Carl Jung's work in psychological archetypes.
Within the development community, we have a lot of unique and interesting personalities. Combining the similar traits, we can derive certain recurring personality types or archetypes that make up the unique people in the field. And these types are the basic archetypes of developers.
To the outside world, these archetypes might seem quirky and strange. In fact, they probably will. Some personality types are strange even within the development community. Looking at you, Perl developers. While researching the different archetypes of developers, we broke them down into 3 groupings: coding styles, knowledge expression, and general personality. I like to give Perl developers a hard time.
I've noticed.
They respond with a regex.
In this 3rd and final episode, talking about the types of programmers you'll meet in your career, we focus on the various expressions of knowledge you'll encounter. If you haven't done so, go back and listen to our episodes on coding and interpersonal styles.
In this episode, we'll discuss each of these knowledge base archetypes. We'll talk about their strengths and weaknesses. Then we'll finish up each one with how to best work with this archetype if you find yourself on a team with them.
Yeah. So we have 7 archetypes we're going to go through in this episode. The first one is the dreamer.
Yeah, the dreamer believes that they're a programmer because they desire to be one and have done surface level work on learning how to code.
Yeah, Will and I know several people like this. Sometimes you might call them the perpetual student, where they're just like, I actually know someone who was so proud of telling people she was learning to code. She never actually did anything with it. Like, this was, when did I start? What, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 years ago when I started learning. She had already been learning for a while and has still not done
Yeah.
anything with it.
And she's still talking on Twitter like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. Oh, man. Yeah, the thing is, a dreamer, if they're not careful, what ends up happening to them is they do hello world in like 15 different languages, and that's as far as they get.
Yeah.
Is, console output. And they end up not focusing and sharpening their skills in one area. And so they end up just dreaming all the time. And this actually is pretty similar to another phenomenon you'll see in, people trying to get into business, right? They call them the wantrepreneur
Yeah.
because they want to be an entrepreneur, but they're never really doing any of the work.
Yeah. This is the wanagrammer.
Wannagrammer.
The want to be a programmer.
That seems like that would be somebody selling CBD products on Instagram, but okay.
I know. What about Wanacoder?
I,
That sounds more like Whataburger.
yeah, I'm not sure. We need some kind of clever, what do they call that? Where you like mash two words together into a
Portmanteau.
portmanteau. Yeah.
Yeah. So hey, guys, here's a chance to get on the podcast.
Yeah.
Send us your portmanteau of wannabe and programmer or coder.
Yeah.
Wannadeveloper?
Eh.
No, it doesn't sound right either.
Yeah.
All right, you guys figure it out and send it to us. We'll pick the best one, and when we do water bottles again, we'll send it to you.
And feel free to send us some obscene ones too that we won't share, but we'll still appreciate them greatly. Okay, I will. Fine. You don't have to endorse this. I will endorse that. The thing is about a dreamer is that they tend to overestimate their skill level and they get really frustrated or quit when they're faced with a difficult or challenging problem to solve.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember? Oh, this was probably our first year doing Developer Launchpad. May have been when we were still under the Code Newbie umbrella. We had that one guy show up, and he had been learning to code for several years. He knew like a bunch of different languages, but you like talking to him, you could tell what he did was he would start learning it, and as soon as he got to the complex, the difficult stuff in the language, he would go learn something new.
Yeah, because that wasn't the feedback loop that made him feel good, right? It wasn't the I accomplished something. It's I learned the easy part of the curve.
Yeah. Well, he didn't want to put in that effort to get past that hurdle.
Yeah.
He wanted to be like the I can code, and it was, it worked up until a point, and then he hit the more challenging stuff and wasn't getting the reward for figuring out things that he'd already figured out. Yeah, and I think he came to one event and never came back. Maybe two. I don't remember.
I will say that that's also a flaw in the way that programming is taught.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's like, here's all the, hand-holding help up to a certain point, and then it just drops off a cliff.
Yeah. Well, math is that way too a lot.
So is language learning.
Yeah. It's like, well, the idea, I know what the idea is. The idea is they're trying to teach you how to think that way, but then they never go, all right, here's how to apply that thinking to something complex. It's all right, now do the complex thing using the multiple skills you've got. And it's like, well, how do I combine those skills? That was the thing I liked about learning from you is you had me do all the basic stuff on my own, and then I'd come in and you'd be like, all right, let's work through this really complex problem together.
Yeah. Well, I've seen enough people hit the wall in that, right? Like,
yeah. And you would be like, here's how you apply these things that you've already learned.
Here's how you team up the Power Rangers here to get through this.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right. No, that's pretty dorky. I'm so sorry. So if you get one of these people on your team, there's a few things you can do. Probably the simplest, and what you're probably actually going to do, is you relegate them to the more simple, mundane operations. But still make sure they understand they're doing important work, right?
That's the key, is if they feel like what they're doing is important, they will sit and do a lot of mundane stuff. I remember when I first started, I would do stuff that right now I'd be like, can we get someone else to do this? This is like really boring.
Yeah.
But at the time that was new and challenging, and I was getting to code and I was getting to actually write production code, even though it was really mundane stuff for the other developers. And they loved it because they didn't have to do the mundane, the boring things. They could focus on solving the problems. And they had a junior developer who wanted to do that, who was happy doing that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is this tends to season them after a while, because
Mhm.
once that stuff starts getting boring and you start seeing the signs of that, then you can start kinda loading them up with a little bit harder stuff,
Yeah.
right? This is a temporary place that you tend to pass through, for the most part, or you become a manager.
Yeah. I was gonna say, realistically, though, you're not likely to see a true dreamer on your team because they're never going to get to the point where they can get a job or will even apply to jobs.
Yeah, well, I'll say that, but I will say if the boss has a nephew
Well, there's
that comes
that.
in and works for him, it will be that guy.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that guy, the next one is the vainglorious newbie, and holy crap, we've all been there. At some point, I'm kind of glad mine was a while ago,
Yeah.
where there's not really the whole permanent internet
Yeah.
thing because disk space was expensive. The common case of this is students that did really well in school and they get into the workforce and they have this sense of self-worth and the right way to do everything.
Yeah. They have a kind of an overestimate their knowledge and usefulness as well,
Yeah.
because they're coming in, and I've seen this with people, both in the workforce and in our developer launchpad group. We have people come in and they think they're all that, and then you start talking to them, and you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you're really not. Sorry, bro."
Well, and that's when you have the discussion about cyclomatic complexity and all that like you because the first thing you got to do with these kind of people is you've got to get them to a place where they can learn.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to say before we go any deeper into this that not all new developers are like this.
Yeah, I worked with one at my last job and he was very, very humble about what he could do. And the dude reworked our payment processor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like diagrammed it, did all this stuff because like they put him in there supposedly just initially to document it. He's like, I think I can fix this. And he just jumped in there and did it. And it's like, dude, what?
Yeah.
And so you'll also run into some of them that can back this
Mhm.
crap up because it's like the way they think and they're already there. They just don't have the
Yeah.
syntax.
And we'll talk about them next, actually.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I just want to point out that not all new developers and not all developers coming out of school are going to be like this,
Right.
but there is a large enough subset that they have an archetype.
Right.
These people are proof that a degree in computer science doesn't exactly mean you know anything about software development or creating production quality code.
Yeah. I'll say, I've got a comp sci, right? And I would say that probably 90% of my knowledge in software development had nothing to do with the university. At the very least, 90%. Right? Like it's good for some
Yeah.
structural things and some bigger concepts, but as far as like how the nuts and bolts of how you get stuff done and get it out to production, that's not a thing in school.
Yeah. Going back to school now and learning, it's going through the last couple of years. I've been doing the prereqs to grad school. So I've been doing like the core classes that they think are like, this is the information that you didn't get in undergrad that you'll need for this graduate program. So it's just like a boiled down version of comp sci stuff. It's not a full degree or anything, but it's just like a boiled down. These are the core things you'll need in this program. And looking at it, I can kind of extrapolate. All right, from what I know about people coming out of school and this, it's a lot of theory may not be the right word, but it's a lot of understanding how things work like the larger concepts, but not, like you said, not the nuts and bolts of here's how you actually do it as much.
Well, it's sparring with code.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because you're not going to get hit in the face that hard. But in the real world, you're going to deal with dates in JavaScript. and just, trying to untangle stuff that you don't completely understand and the docs aren't all there, and they don't get that experience.
Yeah.
Now the trick here, well, first of all, I will say the vainglorious newbies also tend not to understand or care about things like password security, and they don't usually know about design patterns or how to write clean, reusable code in a way that's actually clean and reusable.
Yeah. They think they do, but they don't.
Right. Like the guy that just picked up a design patterns book is probably the most dangerous developer you're ever going to run into. It's like the guy that first learns how to shoot a rifle, right?
Yeah.
Don't want to be in a foxhole with that dude because it's really a bad place to be. Once they get better and they get seasoned, they're fine. But it's just that initial phase is a little bit rough. So the trick is you pair these people with a intelligent and experienced mentor, preferably one who's patient, because it's going to take a hot minute, and they can help them overcome that inflated ego, probably by exposing them to experience, right? Like they don't just like break them. It's okay, try this hard thing. And after they step on the rake themselves a few times, then they come around.
What works best is if you pair them with someone who was a vainglorious newbie.
Yeah. Which is like another programmer just in general.
Yeah. Or someone who was very highly intelligent.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is they're going to be like, they need to have that patience to put them in their place in a polite way. Be like, look, you're not as great as you think you are. Everyone here is just as good a coder as you or better.
Yeah. And I remember early on in my career, I was working with a guy named Joe Audette, and Joe, I think he still develops.
I think I've met him.
You might have. Yeah. We actually ought to get him on the show sometime. We need a pretext for that. But Joe, one of the things that he did at one point, because every time I would overhear a conversation, I'd pop in. It's like, you're a junior dev, He goes, it's okay that you know this stuff and it's okay to discuss it. But he goes, when you pop in like Kramer off of Seinfeld, it doesn't help your case. Like that's actually what he said to me. And he was completely right. Because I've worked with a developer that did that. And I was like, man, that's annoying. And I didn't realize I was doing it.
Yeah.
But
no, that makes perfect sense.
And he was the sage in that situation. And I was the vainglorious newbie going, oh, you should do all this other stuff. You should have, this was like 2003. Like you should have automated builds. You should be running tests. Automated. Like that was not a thing. And yes, it was forward looking and all that, but the infrastructure wasn't there. And they were just trying to keep their head above water. And it was a bad time for me to be suggesting that. It was arrogant.
Well, that's the thing. This particular type pairs well with the sage. And we will talk about the sage in just a little bit. But before we get to that, we have one other young developer we want to talk about. And we've already kind of mentioned them. And that is the young genius.
Right.
Now, this typically autodidactic or self-taught young coder is the most excited to try the next new big thing in tech and programming. They are always looking for the next big thing to come out. And they're super excited and pumped about everything they do.
Right. And this one actually tends to come before the vainglorious newbie a lot of times because, they learn all this stuff and then they get into a situation where they feel like the people around them don't get it. And so they start thinking, they start being cocky.
Yeah. They're always following the trends. They know way more about programming than they should. Kind of like your Kramer story. It's like, it's cool to know all this stuff, but dude, come on. And they spend a majority of their free time coding. I think when I was doing the research for this outline, one of the articles said they spend 90% of their time outside of work coding on side projects and learning the new thing and stuff like that.
Still sounds like now. Crap. Because I'm not young and I'm pretty sure I'm not a genius either. So I'm the.
Yeah, you're the.
That's the remaining word in that particular.
Yeah, but there, I mean, that's a pattern that goes on throughout their life for some of them. But, that's programming is their passion. And it's something that a lot of times they have a degree in something else. They've tried something else and they came to this and they're like, oh my goodness, this is my calling. One of the things I read, they didn't find programming found them.
Yeah.
Is the kind of thing. It's just like, this is just, and I understand that because that's how I feel about it. I'm like, I was really into it in high school. I got out of it. And part of me is like, I'm glad I did because I got a lot of experience I never would have gotten otherwise. But part of me is like, imagine where I'd be if I had like followed my passion.
Yeah.
Probably living in Silicon Valley and, driving a Tesla.
Right. That's probably not.
No.
It's probably.
I'm shaking my head. Y'all can't see that.
Yeah. Just gonna throw that out there. Not so much. These kind of people, they will look at the code enough where they don't see the code anymore. Like I remember that line in the Matrix, right? Like I don't even see the code. And I definitely have that with HTML usually, and I have it with C# code and SQL code. I can definitely, like, it doesn't look the same as it is on screen because I have spent a lot of time. These people will do it in a very short period of time. So they're 2 or 3 years in, not 20 something.
Yeah. I remember in high school, especially when we get in trouble and weren't allowed on the computers, we got kicked off the computers a lot in high school for hacking to play video games. Anyway.
Changing the desktop backgrounds was my favorite.
Oh, yeah. That was, we changed, well, I didn't, but one of my friends changed the load screen.
Yeah. Or you could mess with the binary.
Yeah. Doug is a dork.
Yeah.
And he changed it on all the lab computers because our friend Doug was in the lab after ours, but he didn't know which one he sat at. So he changed it on all of them.
Yeah.
We almost got expelled for that one, but like I got sent to the principal's office and I wasn't even involved in it. And just because I was always involved in everything, but I wasn't involved in this one.
Usually it was you.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was a safe bet to assume it was me. But we get in there and he's like, I don't know why BJ is here. He had nothing to do with it. And like the principal was like, oh, BJ, you're free to go. She was like, I was about to expel you both, but BJ, you're free to go. And then she gave him detention for like 2 days. She's like, I can't believe, a 16-year-old just did that,
Well, and that was back in the day too, and it was so much easier to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the Minds of Moria security system. Speak friend and enter. Okay, you're admin.
Now, most of the time, these newbies have found a passion for coding, but they haven't quite found their niche. So they're trying out a lot of new stuff and they're excited about every new little thing that comes along because they haven't really gotten that passion, that one thing that they really love. So they may be doing the brand new stuff on the front end and the brand new, API stuff and like playing around with NoSQL. And they're just trying to find where they really want to go because they love programming. They don't know which aspect is going to be their calling. Now, while these guys and gals are too green really to mentor other developers in the workforce, and they do make great mentors for students and for people coming up, they can make great additions to a young startup. Or if you're bringing an existing code base into a more modern framework.
Yeah, I'll tell you another place I've also used these people in the past is you get them to learn about the new framework and make working examples of stuff and then teach the team.
Yeah, I've had
so
that.
They're within a narrow window of stuff, right? They are extremely useful because they have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Because they're not supporting old systems. They're not dealing with all the other crap. And so they can be a damage multiplier for your senior devs and still be very, very useful.
Yeah.
In that situation. And it will season them as well because they'll be like, oh, I expressed this in this way and this other person didn't get it. Right. Because like when I think of the young genius, I think of like the lone gunman from X-Files. Right. Like where they're really smart and they're really cocky, but some of their stuff is kind of like, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
And it's kind of that personality corridor there.
Yeah, I get that. Like, there's some really good here, and there's some really, like, if treated right, and this is the same with all these, if treated properly, every one of these, even if they sound terrible, they can grow into someone super
Yeah.
useful on your team.
And they can be more fulfilled.
And it may just be reading this book about, qualities of a team player, but that's the way I'm looking at things these days is how can this grow into a good team player? And so that's like when I was writing this, I was thinking about that. So we've mentioned it, we've talked around it. It's time to talk about the sage.
Right. This is the highly experienced coder. They're probably not up to date on the latest framework because they have crap to keep running. So they're not going to learn Angular 9. They're probably not even doing single page apps right at this point. But they have deep knowledge of coding principles, usually a fairly deep knowledge of business processes attached to those things. And they have years of experience that they can share, and it doesn't matter what language.
Yeah. What's funny is until recently, I really didn't think like the business process was, well, it's important for the business people, but like outside of I'm building the business app, I didn't think of that being an important knowledge base to have till I had someone else work, like making some changes and updating some code I wrote a couple of years ago. And he's like, so I just don't understand. He's like, in the database, you have this as like a many to many relationship, but in the code, it's like a one to many relationship. And I was like, oh, yeah, that goes back to one. We probably would have written it differently had we known what we found out towards later on in the project. But it goes back to the business process of, that object, it needs to like stay with when they replace something, it needs to stay with have the history, but also go over to the new one. And so in the database, it's many to many, but the code is treating it like a one to many because it's within a certain constraint, it's one to many, but overall it could be on many different ones. And he was like, yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
But my specific business knowledge is not what I'm talking about. It's his history of business knowledge because he's been doing this for longer than you have. And his extensive knowledge of, businesses do things like this and that, he was able to pick up on it really quickly. And he's like, oh, yeah, I've seen that before. I know where you're going with this. I gotcha. And it just like, I had not really considered that an important piece of knowledge to have outside of that specific realm until I saw him generalize it. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Now, sages will also typically be a bit slower to get things done. There's a good reason for that. A lot of times it's because they know what they're doing and they're setting things up that they need to go faster later. This was a problem I've run into at several employers where they're like, oh, you didn't get anything done for the first 3 weeks of this project. And then, the next 3 weeks of a 6-week project, all of a sudden you're just done. It's because you did the groundwork first and they can't see the groundwork. People that have been at this for a while tend to be like this. And this is something I actually learned from a guy that I worked with at my dad's company. And so we would go out and we would deliver oil, right? And so it's like, you have either boxes or barrels. And I was actually so lightweight that I would get on the barrel grabber thing, which is like a little cart that you hooked on. And I didn't have enough mass to tip the barrel over. And so the guy I would get on it and he'd pull me by the shoulder and then he'd get on his and pull his. And I noticed, I was like, man, I'm so much faster than you. He goes, yeah, but you can't do that all day. And these guys have learned this at a development level. They understand that I can't work myself to death in January and think that June is going to be good. So they just work at a steady, constant pace and they plan and they do things with a understanding of the long-term results, but they're not going to rush.
Yeah.
So think of an old man gardening.
It is. It's the kind of the concept that slow and steady wins the race. It is slow, steady pace, but they get the work done and they get the work done typically on time.
Yeah, and it's done when it's done. It's not done and coming back in 6 weeks with 500 bugs in it.
Yeah, that's true. An interesting thing about the sage too is they will spend the majority of their time kind of staring at a problem, thinking about all the ways to solve it because they've solved it in multiple ways or they know multiple ways because of experience. Then they'll start refining those before they ever
Right.
write a line of code.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you get to a point where you just sit quietly and plot it out and try to get your head around what the actual problem is before you ever start writing code. And this is something that people that manage developers a lot of times don't realize. Unfortunately, especially if they haven't done it for a while, it's just something that they miss. These people are really best utilized when building or maintaining larger, older code bases, which larger code bases usually are older because that's how you get big as you get old. They also make really good mentors and code reviewers because they're able to think of all the possible ways to solve a problem because they've seen most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we'll also say sometimes they are dismissive of newer things. And sometimes there's a reason for that. It's because they've seen 500 iterations of the newer thing already.
Yeah. I have found working with some sages or pseudo sages that, people who don't have all the characteristics of a sage, but some of them, that they will just be like, oh, well, this is that new thing, or you're a junior, or, I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. And I'm like, yeah, but I've got more experience in this particular thing than you. Now, a good sage, a healthy sage, will go, hey, and I've heard you say this before, where you're like, you got, a lot more experience in, Angular than I do. So what would you do in this situation to a junior developer?
Yep. I do that all the time. Oh, and my strategy is why would I not save my energy for a place where it's going to be more effective?
Now, the nice thing about these is they will think of, if you understand that they're not trying to tell you your code is bad, or if they say it right, because I've worked with some who were terrible at this, and they weren't. Once I got to know them, I figured out, oh, they're not trying to say my code is bad. They're just going, oh,
they just can't communicate.
Yeah, it's their issue with communication. But it was just like, oh, well, there's like these, and it's another thing where they're like, they almost have analysis paralysis if they're not careful, because I have been on a call with some who are just like, we could do it this way, or we could do it this way, or we could do it this way, or we could do it this way. And like literally the development director had to be like, all right, you know way more about this system than I will ever know.
And that I ever hope to know.
Yeah.
I hope to get promoted out of this.
But I need you to focus on the problem at hand. And we need to know, it was connecting with the older system. How do we connect with this system? What are the endpoints? What do we pass in? We need to know the specifics on this particular problem, not all these edge cases. He's like, we'll deal with the edge cases when they come up. And you know way more about that, and we'll ask you for your help when that happens. We just need to know in general how we're going to do it. And so like having a good manager who can just rein them in when they get into that analysis paralysis is really, really useful. And I have seen that. And anytime I have to deal with that particular person, I usually ask that particular manager to come to that meeting because he works really well with her. And she is really, really smart, but she is very much that like, oh, this way and 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 this way.
Yeah, there's just some people that can fly and can't land a plane.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to put it. So speaking of being able to fly and not land a plane, let's talk about people who can do aeronautical engineering but can't fly. And that would be the theoretician.
Yes. This academic expert can spend hours lecturing on the history of computer science or the details of some obscure language like Perl, but knows nothing about practical software development. See, I threw a Perl joke in there for you. That's how close we are.
Yeah, you didn't end the irregular expression though. So yeah, so a theoretician, Perl developers, by the way, are pretty much never theoreticians. I've never met one that's like that. They're like, right there doing the thing.
No. Yeah. I know that. That's why I threw that in there.
But a theoretician, if you think of somebody who is doing a best practices document on here's how you do systems, whatever that is, the guy's pitching microservices to startups right now, totally in this space. They will write the most elegant, unintelligible code that you will ever see in your life. The problem is it's optimized to the extreme, usually optimized for being changed when you're not going to change it. Like, oh, well, we're doing this in case we have to change out the database. It's like the startup runs out of money in 6 weeks. If you spend 5 weeks making it database agnostic, you'll never need the other database because we'll be bankrupt. I have a hard time dealing with these people. I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. This is not a personality category that I handle well.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, they annoy me too, but I can handle them a lot better than you can.
Well, I can handle them. It's just it might be an HR incident.
Like I said, I handle them better than you.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah, they get really distracted by micro optimizations. So stuff that's like, oh, this is 4 nanoseconds faster than your code. It's like, yeah, but like if it takes a developer a week to figure out what you did and it takes them an hour to figure out what I did, how many times does your code have to run to make up for that difference in cost? The other thing is they get really wound up about imperfections in existing tools, and they'll sit and spin on a project, trying to basically make a better mousetrap or make a better wheel, essentially, versus just rolling something.
Now, outside of academia, a theoretician actually can be a huge asset to your team. You have to keep them within the bounds of the project, or
even smaller areas.
Yeah, use them like we were talking about with the young genius. They're if not careful, a young genius will become a theoretician.
Yeah, that's absolutely a growth path that they will get on.
Yeah. And so you want to, like with the young genius, you want to catch them and guide them more, like pair them with the sage and guide them that direction, unless you want them to focus on researching new solutions. And that's a good place for a theoretician is, hey, we need to update our website that was built in 98. Can you research the best options for updating that?
I recommend a mix of powdered iron oxide and powdered aluminum and a blowtorch. That's the 50-50 molar weight, please.
Yeah. We finally got off GeoCities last week.
Yeah. It's still around, by the way.
Oh, I know. That's why I used it.
Yeah. The other thing is they can also be really good if you want to have somebody that's like a developer evangelist.
Yeah.
Like deeply digs into new tech, but doesn't have to make anything practical.
Mm-hmm. And we know a few of those. Actually, that's a job that had I not gone into the public sector, I was really interested in early on in my career. I was like, this would be really cool because I like public speaking. I'm very outgoing. I'm an extrovert, which is an outgoing extrovert, which is really rare for a software developer. And so that is a job I seriously looked into because I thought this would be great. I can create new things. I can teach people stuff like that. That said, the very next archetype that we're going to talk about is the evangelist. And this is not the tech evangelist, but the outspoken evangelist will want to change all of your existing tools and processes because they believe the project can be improved by something else.
Right. And these people tend to irritate sages a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want to see friction between senior members of a team, this guy and the sage, that's a bad combo to get them into an argument. And the reason is they always want to do something new, seemingly. Now, I will say that they know a lot about software development, but a lot of times they don't know a lot about actually day-to-day grinding through and writing code and about maintaining that code. Right? This is the person that's like, "Oh yeah, let's rewrite all of our systems in Forth." Well, that's fine, except you can't get a Forth developer,
These are actually like the opposite of the theoretician.
Yeah, or or they're a theoretician for new things almost. I mean, it's like,
No, because like the theoretician is they know all the ins and outs of like the programming language and stuff, whereas the evangelist knows a lot about the software development process.
yeah.
And so they're like, "Oh, hey, let's bring in these new tools. Let's redo the way let's change from Subversion to Git. Let's do this.
And let's change back in 6 months.
Yeah. Whereas the theoretician is like they don't know anything about the process around software develop, like the process around programming, but they can tell you the ins and outs, like the obscure parts of whatever language that they happen to be focused on at the
Yeah.
time.
So these people will tend to be slow, or a lot of them will. In fact, one sub archetype is the slow typer. So they'll hunt and peck at the keyboard and they get like maybe 30 words a minute tops. Probably not even that, to be 100% honest. And a lot of that is because they're overthinking about what they're doing versus doing.
Oh yeah.
Thinking about how to sell the idea versus make the idea.
Oh, I've seen that. Of course, you are very much not like this because there have been times where you've done a keyboard shortcut and I'm like, "Hey, what'd you do?" And you're like, "I don't know. I'll try to slow my hands down," and you watch what I hit because I don't even remember what I hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because your mind is do the thing and your hands just make it happen,
Right.
which I'm developing that too with stuff like that. But these people, like you said, they will be like very slow typers, very like hunt and peck on the keyboard.
Right.
They're not going to spend hours and hours coding on their own time. They might spend a bunch of time reading articles and stuff about the latest and greatest ways of doing things.
Yeah. And they'll spend a lot of money
Oh.
too, which brings up the next
Oh, yeah.
archetype, their sub archetype, the money waster. Now, these are people that they'll go to every available training. They'll advocate for all these new trainings, even if it's stuff that you're never going to use. I went to a SQL Server analytics services training that one of the guys on a previous team that I was on wanted to go to, and got it advocated that our entire team was going to this thing. You know how much we actually used it? We never used it. Not once. We used it in that training. I still have the book on my shelf. That's what these people will get you into. Now, every so often, they'll find something that's valuable and saves money. So, like, they're not necessarily bad. They're inefficient a lot of times.
I had a lead developer who thought I was like this. And so was trying to get me to trying to push me into like these really weird and trainings because she thought, "Oh, that's what would interest me." And I'm like, "No, I'm interested in useful trainings. It's just not the stuff that you do," because she worked with the older systems and I was doing the newer stuff. And it was like, "Oh, well, you don't need the intro class because you're already a developer, so you need the advanced thing." I'm like, "No, I need the intro class here," and stuff like that. Where it's like, if you're not careful working with this type, you can like if you think someone is this type and you're like trying to help them and like do that and they're not, it can like I guess what I'm getting at is people can misidentify, so be careful when you're trying to figure people out because you can misidentify someone as this type if you just don't understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I've worked with a few of these, both in ineffective and effective positions. The ineffective ones, they tend to run off the rails and just, get into all this other tech. And then you look, and 6 months after they've been hired, they have shipped nothing. Like like if you're looking and going, okay, I want a tech job for 6 months and then I want to get fired and get a severance check because I'm starting a business. Like this seems like this kind of thought process almost attracts those people. That's and that's also an ineffective use of them, right? Because you're letting them spin off into some place that they don't really need to be. Now, if you use them effectively, you get them to do some R&D or train your customers.
Yeah. Now that's a good use for him. The evangelist is really a project manager at heart, but they haven't quite figured out that they are, or they haven't been able to make that move. I was telling you earlier about a former coworker of mine who left, and like she was a junior developer, fair to Midlands developer. Not a great developer, but not bad. But that just wasn't her interest. She didn't care about the software development. I invited her to some of the events and stuff, learning stuff. Like I invite everybody at work, and she just wasn't. She's like, "Hey, I'm not interested in it." She was going to management training and getting a master's in that kind of stuff, and now she's running a department. Like a few months ago she was a junior developer, and now she's running a department because that's where she wanted to be.
Yeah. Right. And these people, the thing is if they are put in the right position where they can grow, they'll really get somewhere. But if they're not,
Yeah,
they're toast. They're like a feeder goldfish. I mean, like you put them in a big pond, they grow big. You
yeah.
put them in a small tank, not so much. And you just have to find that role for them.
If you have someone like this on your team, put them into that. Or another thing you can do is give them their own side project to manage as they see fit, like a small, you know, non-essential project that they can build out however they want. Because what's going to happen is they're going to change things and they're going to do it to themselves, and they'll realize the pain of it and go, "Oh,
Yeah.
I need to do the research up front, figure out what we're going to use and stick with it." That'll help them grow. Yeah.
Right. And actually consider instead of just see. These people also fall prey to a lot of consulting types who are like, "Oh, I'm your agile consultant," right? Like this was the thing
Yeah.
like 7 or 8 years ago. That's what these people were getting pulled into. Then it was microservices and DevOps, right? And they bring value to the team. It's just you gotta figure out how to rein them in. The last group or the last archetype is the group that you really probably don't have to rein in. You just have to get them moving. And that is the average Joe. These are people that they know enough to get by with good enough code in whatever platform they're in to meet the average needs of a team without a whole lot of fuss and ceremony.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to be the best coder on your team. They're not going to be your go-to person when you need something done, but they're going to be there. They're going to show up, they're going to do their job, and they're going to go home.
Right.
Like the
And honestly, this ought to be most of your coders.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Like the sage, they're slow and methodical, but if chosen correctly, they have the right skills and perform well, even though it's obvious they aren't doing the best work they could. And this is something that everyone goes through too. Like when you've got something else going on, you want to kind of fall into an average Joe coder.
Yeah, you want to coast.
Yeah.
I've got a friend that I have conference calls with periodically. And that was one of the things he was talking about. He's like, yeah, I could do better at what I'm doing at my job, but that extra effort doesn't get me any more money. It doesn't make my contract last longer. It doesn't really even help the client. So why not coast? I would argue that these people are almost like they kind of neutralize the other personality types that tend to be a bit more volatile on a team, right? Like if you have two sages that disagree or two evangelists that disagree, even worse. Like you talk about friction, but if you've got another 20 people around them that are just like, this is stupid, like that can really take the edge off of it, and you won't lose productivity to the more extreme types.
I'm not saying that you should go or be an average Joe, but being kind of that, what was it? Is it, yeah, it was Scott Hanselman who called them the dark matter developer. And I don't think he came up with it. I think he was using an existing term to say, hey, these aren't bad. And that's the thing. They're not bad, but they're
just there.
Yeah, they're not great. They're there. They get the job done. And, there's going to be times like, let's say you get married,
or you have a baby at home.
Yeah, you're not going to be focused on growing your career, on doing all this research and stuff. You're going to be focused on other things, but you're still going to show up at your job. While you're there, you're going to get it done. And then you're going to go home and you're going to do your own thing. And that is perfectly fine.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's healthier, honestly.
Yeah. The average Joe tends toward languages and systems that don't change a lot over time. as they're not likely to do a lot of learning or training outside of work training.
Yeah, and I kind of fell into this at a previous couple jobs ago, just because there was a lot of stuff going on, and you had all the JavaScript fatigue going
Mhm.
on then, and I'm like, I don't want to spend 6 months learning this thing just to have them yank it out from under me,
Yeah.
right? Because that's time I could put towards something I care about,
Mhm.
and the JavaScript thing wasn't paying off, right? Like this is a legitimate posture to end up in.
Mhm.
So we're not down on this. Like we want to make sure that that's kind of clear. Like on average, everybody's average.
No. Now, your average 9 to 5er or your average Joe can be the most difficult to motivate. Like when you're coming up on a deadline, they're just going to keep their steady pace. They're going to do their job. They're going to fulfill their requirements, but they're not going to put in overtime. They're not going to work that extra. They're not going to do a death march. And they're near impossible to motivate. The other ones we've talked about throughout this entire series have ways to motivate them to work harder during certain times. Your average Joe doesn't. Like you got to really search for what's going to get them to work harder.
Yeah, and the thing is I'm not even sure that that's overly valuable because most of the time when you want people to work harder, it's like, look, they're here 40 hours a week. Like if you're not getting the value out of them, that's kind of on you. The way you're handling things, the way you're managing things.
Yeah. Now, if you are 2 weeks towards the end of a project and you're like, all right, we got to put in, 50 hours this next 2 weeks and stuff like that, they're still not going to want to like get to the end of the project. They'll keep putting in, and like you're not going to shame them into it. You're not going to do this. Now you might be able to be like, all right, look, for all the extra hours you put in, we'll give you comp time or we'll give you extra vacation time. That might motivate them to work harder.
Yeah, work an extra 40 hours, get this $10 O'Charlie's gift card.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
I've worked at a few places like that. It's like, really?
Yeah.
I would almost go, I'm not going to tell them that I worked over.
Yeah.
Like I would rather work for free than be insulted.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I will say this though, while your theoreticians and evangelists are out there exploring new areas and new things, your average Joe is going to be steadily moving forward on the project, building the meat of your application. They may not be going out there solving the difficult problems, but they're going to be building the things. They're going to come in, they're going to work hard every day, and they're just going to keep going. And, a lot of times your sages come out of an average Joe. Your sages is someone who has been an average Joe. They may have started off as a young genius. They got some life stuff going on. They started off as a young genius. They didn't have, a girlfriend. They didn't have anything. They end up getting married, having kids. They become an average Joe. They do their 9 to 5er. Then the kids leave. They've got, a few decades of experience. And now they're a sage because they know what they know. They like what they're doing and they're opinionated about it. And that is a typical progression there. So throughout this series on personalities in software development, you'll notice a certain term missing. The term rock star has been used a lot in programming to define many different types of personality, usually related to a very talented, possibly arrogant developer. Sometimes it's used in a positive light, and others, it's not so good. To avoid muddling the term even more, it was not one of the personalities in this series, as a lot of them could fit into that rock star category. While you may find yourself or your coworkers leaning towards one or the other of these types, understand that they are archetypes or extreme versions of a personality type. We made them even more extreme in our discussion to help understand the type. And other than the average Joe, you're not likely to run into anyone who is completely one type or the other. Use these to help understand the motivations behind what you do and behind what your coworkers do. That pretty much wraps us up. What do you have for us this week for tricks of the trade?
Well, I want to say that, we're fountains, not statues, right? You are going to transition between these archetypes throughout your career. There have been periods of time where I was an average Joe developer. There have been times when I have been extremely arrogant and been pretty much a vainglorious newbie. There's been times I've been kind of the old sage. Instead of accepting that you're necessarily one thing or another, figure out which one is needed and be that. And this will take a little bit more work to do that, but you can usually cultivate personality traits. Now, you probably are not going to want to be a vainglorious newbie, but you might take pieces of that, right? Like hey, I know a bunch of stuff about a bunch of stuff, because those people, to protect their ego, they will learn a lot of things. And maybe that's the person you need to be. So look at these as not just a way of understanding your coworkers, but as, hey, I can get into this mode and be more useful than I am right now. And sometimes that's just being an average Joe, right? They just need more people. And that's totally fine. You can get other things working in your life during that time. There's nothing wrong with that. Just be willing to treat this as mutable state rather than immutable. And it will help you a lot in your career. That's all I got. If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons.
The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up for weekly emails with extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Catch us each week as we broadcast live, talking about what's going on in the tech world and answering listener questions.
Learn more about all of our shows and groups by going to CompleteDeveloperNetwork.com, where you'll find links to Junior Developer Toolbox, Developer Launchpad, and our other communities. Thanks for listening. See you next time.